At exactly 10:17 on a bright Sunday morning, Sienna stood on the doorstep with one suitcase, a trembling smile, and a secret she was terrified to confess. The man opening the door had no idea that the woman standing before him was about to change his life forever. She looked at him for several seconds, as if trying to memorize his face before everything became complicated. Then she took a slow breath and made him a promise that would eventually become the hardest promise either of them had ever tried to keep. She told him that she needed a place to stay, that she would follow every rule, and that she would never ask him for anything except a roof over her head. But before she stepped inside, she looked directly into his eyes and made one final request. He had to promise her that he would never fall in love with her. If you believe kindness can give people a second chance when life has nearly broken them, please take a moment to like this story, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy. His name was Everett Hale, a quiet 34-year-old carpenter who lived alone in a modest house on a peaceful tree-lined street. Everett had spent the last 3 years rebuilding his life after losing his younger brother in a highway accident. He had stopped attending family gatherings, stopped making long-term plans, and learned how to fill silence with work. His house was simple but warm, with sunlight pouring through the front windows every morning and a small wooden porch he had built with his own hands. He was not rich, famous, or extraordinary in the eyes of the world. He was simply a man who knew what it felt like to lose someone and keep waking up anyway. Sienna had been living a completely different kind of nightmare. 6 months earlier, she had left a relationship that had slowly destroyed her confidence. Her former fiancé had controlled her finances, isolated her from friends, and convinced her that she would never survive without him. When she finally found the courage to leave, she discovered that starting over was much harder than she had imagined. The apartment she could afford was unsafe, her savings were nearly gone, and the small design company where she worked had recently closed. She had applied everywhere, but every rejection made her feel as though the voice of her former fiancé was becoming true. "You cannot do this alone." The only person who had offered her help was Everett, an old friend of her late mother's family. He had known Sienna when she was younger, before life had taught her to hide her emotions behind polite smiles. When he heard she had nowhere safe to go, he offered his spare bedroom without hesitation. He did not ask for rent immediately. He did not ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He simply said that she could stay until she found her feet again. That was why she stood on his porch that sunny morning, holding the handle of her suitcase so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. Everett stepped aside and let her enter. She smiled nervously and rolled the suitcase across the wooden floor. For the first time in months, she was inside a place where she did not feel watched. There were no angry voices behind closed doors, no accusations, no threats, no fear that a simple mistake would become a reason for punishment. There was only sunlight, the smell of fresh coffee, and the strange sound of peace. She tried to make herself invisible during the first few days. She woke early, cleaned the kitchen, made breakfast, and searched for jobs until her eyes hurt. Everett noticed that she apologized for everything. She apologized when she used a glass. She apologized when she walked too loudly. She even apologized when Everett thanked her for washing a plate. He slowly realized that Sienna wasn't merely afraid of needing help. She had been taught to believe that needing anything made her a burden. So Everett did something simple. He stopped letting her apologize. Every morning, they ate breakfast together near the kitchen window. At first, their conversations were short. Then they became longer. Sienna discovered that Everett had an unexpectedly dry sense of humor, while Everett discovered that Sienna laughed with her entire face when she forgot to be guarded. Their friendship grew quietly, almost accidentally. One afternoon, Sienna came home carrying a small cardboard box. Everett was repairing a cabinet when he noticed her expression. She had gotten another rejection email. She placed the box on the counter and tried to smile, but her eyes filled with tears. Everett did not tell her that everything would be fine because he knew life did not always become fine simply because someone said it would. Instead, he made 2 cups of tea and sat beside her. That evening, Sienna told him about the relationship she had escaped. She admitted that she had spent years believing she was difficult to love. Everett listened without interrupting. When she finished, he told her that surviving something painful did not make her damaged. It meant she had survived. Something changed between them that night. Not romance. Not yet. Something more dangerous. Trust. Weeks passed. Sienna found temporary work at a small interior design studio across town. She came home exhausted but proud. She started painting again, something she had abandoned years earlier. Everett began noticing little signs that the woman who had arrived carrying one suitcase was slowly returning to herself. Her shoulders were no longer constantly tense. She sang while cooking. She left her bedroom door open. She began laughing without checking whether anyone was angry about it. And Everett began falling in love. He hated himself for it. Every time Sienna smiled at him, he reminded himself of her promise. Every time she fell asleep on the couch while they watched an afternoon movie, he quietly placed a blanket over her and walked away. He knew she was healing. He knew she needed safety, not another complicated relationship. So he kept his feelings buried. Then one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Sienna received a phone call from her former fiancé, Callum Mercer. She ignored it the first time. Then the second. By the fifth call, her hands were shaking. Callum had discovered where she was living and told her that he wanted to meet. He threatened to expose private information about her and make sure she never found another job. When Everett came home, he found Sienna sitting on the porch with tears streaming down her face. For a moment, Everett's old grief returned with the same force he had felt after losing his brother. He wanted to fight someone, to make the fear disappear, to protect her from every cruel thing in the world. But he understood that protection did not mean taking control away from her. So he sat beside her and reminded her that she was not alone. The next morning, Sienna made a decision. She would not run again. With Everett's support, she contacted the appropriate authorities and gathered the messages and evidence she had saved. She spoke with her employer about what had happened. She began rebuilding her life on her own terms. But something inside Everett had shifted. He realized that loving someone did not necessarily mean rescuing them. Sometimes it meant standing beside them while they rescued themselves. Months passed, and Sienna received an offer for a permanent position with a respected design firm in another city. It was the opportunity she had dreamed about. It was everything she had worked for. Yet when she returned home that afternoon, she couldn't bring herself to celebrate. Everett knew immediately. He found her sitting on the porch, looking at the suitcase she had once brought into his house. She told him she had accepted the job. He smiled. He told her he was proud of her. She began crying. Because somewhere between the first cup of coffee and all those ordinary afternoons, Everett had become home. She reminded him of the promise she had made before moving in. She had been terrified of falling in love because love had once meant losing herself. She thought the safest thing she could do was build a wall between them. Everett finally admitted that he had fallen in love anyway. He told her he had tried not to. He told her that he had respected her fear and never wanted to turn her healing into another obligation. He said that if she needed to leave, he would still be grateful that she had walked through his door. Sienna cried harder. Then she told him something he would never forget. She said she had spent years believing love meant someone owning part of her. Everett had shown her that real love could mean giving someone the freedom to become who they were meant to be. She still took the job. For the first few months, they lived in different cities. They talked every evening. They visited each other on weekends. There were difficult days, misunderstandings, and moments when both wondered whether distance would win. But it didn't. One bright Saturday morning, nearly a year after Sienna had first arrived with her suitcase, Everett stood on the same porch holding a small wooden box he had made himself. Sienna walked toward him smiling. Inside the box was a simple key. Not a key to his house. A key to a small studio he had renovated beside it. He told her it was hers. A place where she could paint, design, dream, and build whatever future she wanted. Sienna stared at the key through tear-filled eyes. Then she laughed softly and told him that she had once made him promise not to fall in love with her. Everett smiled and said that promises were sometimes made when people were afraid. She stepped closer and whispered that she was no longer afraid. Their story did not end with a grand wedding or a perfect life. It became something much more beautiful, two wounded people choosing, every day, to make each other feel safe. Sienna learned that love did not have to cost her freedom. Everett learned that opening his heart again did not betray the person he had lost. Sometimes, after heartbreak, the greatest miracle is not finding someone who saves you. It is finding someone who reminds you that you are capable of saving yourself. And perhaps that is what love was always supposed to be. Not a cage. Not a rescue. Not a promise to never fall. But two people standing beside each other, free to stay, free to leave, and choosing to stay anyway. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes people deserve second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Legacy for more stories about hope, healing, and unexpected love. Special request: comment "Love should feel like home" if you believe everyone deserves a safe place to begin again. Because sometimes the person who arrives at your door carrying a single suitcase isn't asking you to change their life. Sometimes they are simply looking for one safe place where they can finally become themselves again, and without realizing it, they may become the reason you find your heart again too.